Hello there. My name is Frankie Debo and I was born in 1969. 53 years ago, back in a time, my parents Lillian and Willie were to teenagers and were in love together for a short time for 3 years. After 3 years in relationship, decided Lillian and Willie to married. On the 1 Street, September 1967, married Lillian and Willie for the church. There were a lot of people invited at our ceremony on that day. Lillian and Willie both had work in the city of Aldenard. My father worked in the green department, and my mother worked as a cleaning lady. They had a rented house in the Dinsestrat where they lived. My parents went to work every day. They didn't have much. They saved up for a car and a TV to watch. They had a small garden to grow vegetables and potatoes, but not much came of it. My dad had been drinking for a few years before the relationship. My mother came from a family of 6 children and so did my father. Every day my father came home drunk and my mother only came home around 8 p.m. Things didn't go well after a week when they were married. There was always a lot of fighting and drinking problems because of my father. My mother wanted to divorce my father. Roger and Simon were Lillian's parents and did not want them to divorce. At the time, this was an embarrassment to the family and worked talked about them. Now my mother speaks to my father and says I am going to divorce you. You knock on me. You come home drunk every day and I don't want this.
Yes, I want a divorce. But I'm not doing it for my parents. Otherwise my parents will be watched by the whole village and I don't want that. I'm sorry I married you. I want a better life. I don't want to live who goes to a bar after working hours and comes home drunk every day. I imagined it differently.
What have I seen in you? You have been in a relationship with me for 3 years, and you never said anything good about me. I'm devastated. Too bad for my parents and myself.
My mother worked hard all days and weeks and months. But my father continued to drink and make a fuss. My father spent more time in the cafes than at home with his wife. But he didn't really care. He had more fun in the cafes than helping my mother. It was very long days and months. The landlady of their cottage asked them that they had 14 days to look for something else. So my father neglected the house. My mother was very sad. My mother's sister lived in the same street as my mother and father and her parents. After finding another house, my mother and father lived on the opposite side of the street from their previous one. My mother changes jobs and started cleaning in the school. She started working from 4 p.m. every day except Saturdays and Sundays. My mom prepared dinner for my dad. She had found a new friend and they called them Gabby and Murray Jose. She took care of the children and sometimes they came to visit my mother. My mother then had a TV and a stereo system. She listened to music a lot. Back then it was all rock and roll. My father drank every day and was always late, and when he came home for dinner he threw the food on the wall that my mother had prepared. My father then went upstairs to sleep off his rust, and when it was evening he went back to drink into the night. He has hardly ever been ill. He couldn't master himself, and when he was over he couldn't count to words. Then it was peace itself. But when he started drinking again it was a beast, and my mother was afraid of it. At that time there were no gynecology. Her doctor told my mother not to have children because my father was really a drunk. The doctor said, "It is best not to be intimacy with each other and be careful not to get pregnant, because all that alcohol in his blood will put it on that child, and that is certainly not good and not recommended." That made my mom worry. But my dad obliged and forced her to be intimate in a very unwanted, brutal way. More rape. My mother told her friends that she didn't want children of her own, and that she certainly wouldn't start with a man like my father. She had the fright of her life. Let's just hope I'm not pregnant, because I don't want that at all. I'm not for kids. But the suffering kept coming and going. And my father had fun in the cafes with other women. When he came home every time after that, he threw everything short and small and to pieces and threw it on my mom and stomped on her belly.
My mom was all upset when she learned she was pregnant by someone else that my dad said when he was in a drunken stupor. My mother absolutely did not want that child. You can't raise a child with a father like that. And isn't it good for that child if the father really isn't there for that child? My mother was crying and didn't know what to do with her. She thought to herself, if I had a miscarriage, I would feel much happier than I do now. Then my mother went to the doctor, and the doctor said that she should keep the child and not have an abortion. Whatever the situation was for her.
My mother went to the doctor because she couldn't keep me. She had a miscarriage, but her doctor gave her hope and medication to bring her child into the world. She was 6 months pregnant when this happened. After all that disaster and misery and apart from my father, she had given up hope. She couldn't find a future with my father and couldn't stand what he did to her anymore. She was so petite and pale and had heart palpitations and anxiety because of my father. He wouldn't listen to her and do his thinking and just keep drinking and having fun while my mom was all on her own. She got no help from my father. My mother was broken and humiliated and berated by my father. He was no longer human, but a real beast.